Okay, here we have example 6, and I thought this was a very interesting problem, or set of problems for you to work on just to get you more familiar with positive and negative numbers and also evaluating. So here, this one says let y equal negative x minus 1. Find the value of y in parts A through D, where x has the following values. So they've given you this formula basically that says y equals the opposite or the negative x minus 1. And in this case, they're telling you that this is what's going to replace the x value. So that means that we're going to have negative, but instead of x, we're going to be using negative 1 minus 1. So now we have to work with our positive and negative numbers. So here we have the opposite of negative 1, which is a 1, minus 1, which is 0, just like that. And now then we have to do the same thing, but we're going to do with 100. So I'm going to recopy my formula. The original formula said y equals negative x minus 1. So I'm going to take that value of x and plug it right in there in place of x. So that means we have negative, but instead of x, we're using 100 minus 1. So the opposite of 100 is negative 100 minus 1 is negative 101 because the signs are the same, so we add and keep the sign. Alright, part C. I can move it up here. And again, just to remind you, I'm going to rewrite my formula, which said y equals negative x minus 1. But this time we're using negative 2 in place of x. So that would be negative, and instead of x, negative 2 minus 1. So the opposite of negative 2 would be positive 2 minus 1. Well, we know that to be 1, but the signs are different, so we're subtracting and keeping the sign of the larger number. We've gotten so used to subtraction over the years that it's hard just to let it go. You have to kind of continue to use that word as you go through. Okay, again, I'm going to rewrite my formula. Y equals negative x minus 1. And this time, instead of negative x, we're using a negative a. So when I plug that in, that will be negative, but instead of x, negative a minus 1. So the opposite of negative a would be a positive a minus 1. And we cannot combine those because they're not like terms, so that would be our final answer. Okay, let's go ahead and do example 7 while we're here. So example 7 has 3 parts to it, and it says solve the following equations. Well, now that we have talked about positive and negative numbers, we can use those in order to help us solve equations. Um, and the way we do that is we always look at doing the opposite to get the variable alone and by itself. So we want to use the additive identity or the opposite of a positive 7, which we know to be a negative 7. And we can do that as long as we keep everything balanced. What you do to one side, you have to do to the other side to maintain balance. So now positive 7 and negative 7, those cancel each other out, and you're left with x equals, here we have a positive 3 and a negative 7. So the signs are opposite, which tells us to subtract and keep the sign of the larger number. So x would have to equal 4. All right, for part B, it says negative 10 plus x equals negative 7. So again, we want the variable alone so that we know what it is. So we're going to do the opposite, or the additive identity. So the opposite of a negative 10 would be a positive 10. And as long as we do that to both sides of the equation, then we keep it balanced. So a negative 10 and a positive 10, those are additive identities, so they cancel each other out. And we're left with x on the left side equals, here we have different signs again. So when we subtract 7 and 10, we get 3, and we keep the sign of the bigger number, which would be a positive. So in this case, x equals 3. All right, for our last one, we have negative x equals 5. And at this point, we've not talked about multiplication and division of integers. So what they're wanting you to do is just kind of think your way through this one. They're wanting you to look at this and say, okay, this says the opposite of some number is 5. So think about your opposites. The opposite of what number is 5? And in that case, it would have to be a negative 5, wouldn't it? Because when we do the opposite of negative 5, that would be a positive 5. Now, when we go back over multiplication and division, which I know you guys already know, but then we can divide by negative 1, which would be so much easier. But anyway, this is the point we're at right now, so this is what we'll do. All right.